at this idea about how this kind of education creates a more complete person who is better prepared to take on the uncertainties of life and better prepared to serve in the community. So this is what you have on the first page, and I apologize, I printed it in just black and white, but they're beautiful colors that suggest certain things as well with this. And I'll walk through this to give you a little bit of sense of how it's conceived, how it's designed. And you can also find this on the GE website as well. This is what you can think of as the kind of the catalog entry. And I'm going to return to this at the end. I don't want to go through it as a catalog. But hopefully it'll make clear sense at the end. So to go through this in terms, I'll start with the first aim, which is that of spiritually strengthening. Although it's not formally a part of general education, I just want to point out the centrality, the continued centrality of religious education to our students' experience here. Religious education has, it's not within it's not kind of under general education, it's kind of to get together with general education makes what the catalog refers to as the university core. And we're not making any changes. We don't have, that wasn't part of our mandate to suggest any changes to that. Religious education, 14 credits for religious education. So that of course is going to continue, and that's represented here to help clarify that we're not getting rid of religious education by just focusing on general education. But although it's true that every subject should be taught with the spirit and with an eye towards strengthening our students spiritually, there are some opportunities in some classes to go and do a little bit more. Obviously, religious education approaches this in a certain kind of way. But this idea that a spiritually strengthening education warms and enlightens students by the bright fire of their teacher's faith while enlarging their minds with knowledge. And I really like this language that's in the aim. Students need not ignore difficult and important questions. Rather, they should frame their questions in prayerful, faithful ways, leading them to answers that equip them to give a reason for the hope that's in them and to articulate honestly and thoughtfully their commitments to Christ and his church. One of the things that we wanted to see accomplished somewhere in the general education program were more opportunities for instructors to find ways to engage large questions that both the discipline could provide answers to or help explore, but as well be able to frame this in terms of the gospel and the light and the knowledge that comes to us through the gospel. And so the explorations classes, which I'll return to in just a couple of minutes, is a prime way to do this. And this is one of the newest features of this proposal, is the ability for these classes to be constructed around a question. And it should be a question that your discipline is uniquely poised to get into an answer. But because it's not framed around a discipline, but around a question, you're going to have that opportunity to engage those adjacent disciplines that also have something to bring to bear, even though, of course, you're going to be primarily working from your area of strength. This is the explorations classes, and are going to provide this opportunity, I think, to these kinds of questions that are enduring questions or contemporary questions that our students are interested and wanting to engage. Or in the spiritually strengthening is the first aim. The second aim is that BYU education should be intellectually enlarging. And here it divides us up in terms of developing skills and breadth. The skills are in basic tools of learning, and understanding the broad areas of human knowledge is the breadth. So we'll start here with the skills. Up here at the top, we have things that you should recognize, right? First year writing and advanced writing. These are going to continue on as they have before, with the exception of the fact that we're asking that all students, regardless of scores on AP exams, take first year writing. And that this will be an increase. I see a lot of them. This will be an increase of not as many as you would think, actually. Only about 70% of our students don't currently take first year writing. But this is going to have a positive effect that we have these students, and you've maybe had them in your class, who are a good enough writer in high school that they did well on the AP exam. And then they go away on a mission, they take years, and they put off taking that advanced writing class until they're a senior. And so suddenly it's gone 6 or 7 years between any kind of writing class. This also creates a common experience, which I'm going to return to a little bit later on, and makes possible some unique things. The advanced writing class, a lot of departments in this college have their own advanced writing class. Joyce does a great job of helping to coordinate this and represent this on the advanced writing committee. This will continue. This is kind of the model, actually, that we'd like to see more departments move in the direction of bringing this in-house, because teaching advanced writing in the discipline is way more effective than kind of catch-all writing classes, as good as they can be at times. The quantitative reasoning class maybe should have an asterisk, because we do currently have a quantitative reasoning requirement in general education that a very small number of our students need to take. If they score a 21 or less on the ACT exam, they have to take this quantitative reasoning class, and it's only about 500 students a year, less than 500 students a year that applies to. And that's not what we're talking about with this anymore. The quantitative reasoning, this is a new requirement that in a sense is going to replace the languages of learning quantitative options. So it's a little bit higher level. And again, it's going to be a universal requirement. There's about 20% again of our students don't currently take a class that could meet the languages of learning quantitative requirement. I have to put it in that kind of tentative language, because there's a lot of students who fulfill that languages of learning requirement in 2 different ways right now. They both do it for foreign languages, and they do it through a Stats 121 or Math 112, or one of the classes that are offered in your college, like Geography 222. I need to be careful here because I'm not going to be able to reel all this up, but they're on the sheet here. Okay, again, this is a really good example in your college how you brought this in-house, where the resources existed to do that. And again, doing something like this in the discipline is shown to be the most effective way to do it. But for those students who don't have a discipline that require that kind of class, we're going to be creating a class that will be, it's not a statistics class and it's not a math class, it's a quantitative reasoning class, how to make sense of quantitative information. And this is kind of part, all of these classes together are a way of addressing issues related to information literacy. And it's helpful with the redesign to think about these in tandem, because there's lots of facets of information literacy. And there's not any one class that needs to take on all of that. I mean, all of your classes in one way or another are probably dealing with issues of information literacy. But some of these basic and fundamental skills, we're able to coordinate that we understand that first year writing is going to be focusing on these sorts of issues, advanced writing is going to be focusing on these sorts of issues, and quantitative reasoning on these sorts of issues, so that we don't kind of leave that just to one class. Okay. Moving on with intellectually enlarging, moving on to breadth. And this is the real core of the program, this arts and sciences core, that students are supposed to engage broad domains of knowledge. The gospel provides a chief source of such breadth. We mentioned that religious education continues to be part of this, as well as the way that we do all of our classes with gospel methodologies, as the 2nd century address says. Something that's not well represented on the black and white version is the distinctions that we make here between the broad areas of knowledge that are represented between STEM, social sciences, and arts and humanities, that there's a pretty even distribution between these. And the real core of this comes in these classes here in the arts and sciences core. And here what you have is 2 sets of classes. The first are perspectives classes, and perspectives classes are introductions to the discipline, much like a lot of the classes that we currently teach in general education. So, sociology 111, poli-sci 110, psychology is at 111 as well, right? So a lot of these kinds of classes, they're important classes. A lot of them are service classes for different disciplines, even outside of the college. Econ 110, all of these sorts of things, they would be classes that we anticipate will fit here under the perspectives. And I'll just kind of take a moment to mention this. There's really no class that's currently taught in general education that we don't anticipate there being a place for in the new program. There's going to be shifting demand for these classes, particularly when we get to Civ, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes. But there's nothing that's currently taught that couldn't have a reasonable home in this new proposal. And this is the place where a lot of these land, because they look a lot like a lot of the classes that we currently teach. Okay. Perspectives courses, they introduce students to how knowledge is encountered, developed, and communicated in specific disciplines. We would hope that, well, we expect that in these classes that there's an not to say exploration, but there is an investigation of the limits of a discipline, how a discipline creates knowledge, what its strengths are, and even what its weaknesses, how it fits within kind of other disciplinary approaches. This is an important sort of thing. The second part of this core are these explorations classes that I mentioned before. And these courses, they're inquiry-based courses that are meant to get into these kinds of messy middle sorts of questions, questions where there are kind of overlapping ways of understanding. The instructors for these courses aren't expected to be expert in all of the possible ways to engage the question. They should probably just be expert in one and be informed and aware of the other ways that you engage them. We've been experimenting with this for the better part of a decade through the honors program, the Unexpected Connections classes. How many here have been Alcuin Fellows and taught one of those Unexpected Connections classes? Really? Oh, that's interesting. Okay. There have been quite a few from your college. So they've been team teaching this. We're going to continue to do that because it's a great way to get started with a class. To have that opportunity to team teach with someone from another discipline to help look at it forces you to structure it around a question and to consider other perspectives. And then the idea being that you go off and you're able to do this on your own. This inquiry-based learning. It's a great way to highlight the connections between domains of knowledge. And this is particularly good for students who are not students in your college or in your discipline. That one of the things that we find that when a student, goes, a history student saying, goes and takes, a biology class, when that biology class focuses on kind of the minutia of the discipline, so to speak, a lot of that knowledge is not retained as soon as the student leaves the class. But if that biology teacher instead really helps the student to think about how biology helps them to engage the world and to think like a scientist, those are the kinds of skills that tend to persist. And that's what we're getting at with these explorations class, that you're there to help them understand how a social scientist thinks and how a social scientist creates knowledge in a context that's relevant to the students. We did some focus groups where we did random sampling of students from across the university, kind of statistically significant sampling from different colleges to get a good representation. And one of the comments that one of the students made in one of these 10 sessions that we did has really stuck with me and helps to, I think, illustrate what's should be going on in the explorations classes. And that is, she said that, in fact, this is before we even presented these to them, we were talking about the current GE program and what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it. And she said, question was, what do you expect out of a general education class? And she said, I don't want a general education class to make me memorize anything that I can look up on my phone. And that's why I got a phone. She says, what I want out of a general education class is I want it to teach me to ask the right questions. It's like, yes, that makes total sense, doesn't it? Right? That it's about teaching students to ask the right questions. A lot of you do this, I think, already in a lot of your classes, I hasten to say. Okay, but these are the explorations classes. There's another dimension of breadth that we think is really important for our students as well. And that is breadth of perspective, not only disciplinary breadth, but cultural breadth, you might think of this. Right, the language of the Doctrine and Covenants is that we become acquainted with good books, with languages, tongues, and peoples. with things that are at home, things which are abroad, the wars and perplexities of nations, and the knowledge also of countries and kingdoms. Students at BYU should receive a broad university education that will help them understand important ideas in their own cultural tradition, as well as that of others. And so we've put a certain inflection on our general education classes on this arts and sciences core, in that one of these perspectives or explorations classes is to be designated as what we're calling a global outlook class. And one of these explorations or perspectives classes is to be designated as a diversity and belonging class. And I'll explain a little bit about what that and so this is some of the areas that they'll be in. We have a committee right now that's formulating these, defining exactly what this is meant by global outlook, but that it's that it has a international perspective of some type. Okay, and there's a lot of classes that we currently teach that fit this category, but the students would be expected to take at least one course that match that, in addition to the foreign language requirement, which I'll talk about here in just a second. And then I'll talk about the diversity, unity, and belonging actually in just a second, because that a little bit more detail on that here. Okay. But again, these are the kinds of things that we see as helping students to have a greater breadth in their education, and that they appear in all of these different parts. A big motivation to all of this, again, is helping students to become better citizens. That is, citizens understood in the broadest possible sense, right? Not only citizens of the United States, those who are American citizens, but global citizens as well, kind of understanding their place. And so American heritage will continue to be an important part of this, as well as that we're expecting all students to take at least 3 credits of a foreign language. For a return missionary, that might be an advanced language course, but for other students, that might be an entry-level course at the 100 level. It should be level appropriate. So any foreign language course would be able to meet that requirement. Okay. An important part after intellectually enlarging, the aims talk about that they should be character building. And this can be understood in a lot of different ways. It's developing strong moral character. It gives lists like moral virtues such as integrity, reverence, modesty, self-control, courage, compassion, and industry. Being able to long-term application of gospel teachings in their lives, understanding humankind's eternal nature, and he ends with the blessings of eternal life. They should develop charity, Christ-like love of others. And this is where we feel like American heritage and the foreign language requirement, along with this global outlook requirement, are going to be really important for our students. Our student body and faculty don't tend to be as diverse as you might find on other campuses. This is something that we have to help our students, issues related to this, we have to help our students engage with and consider. And we have to, I think, play to our strengths. And one of the things that we do have the strength in is international experience. This is not always leveraged. Sometimes, a lot of times, students who have experiences on missions come back from that experience and they really need processing of it. Sometimes they come back actually more defensive and insular than when they left. And those of you who have taught this audience in different capacities, I think probably understand what I'm talking about. So part of helping our students to understand themselves as citizens is to help leverage the experience that we have both as faculty as well as the students have had, those who have had the opportunity to be abroad, to understand those experiences in different kinds of ways. American Heritage is undergoing a test for revision, and we've been talking with them. Some of you are probably maybe even involved in that in different sorts of ways to help boost some of these aspects that have been present in the class, but we feel could be lifted out even further. Developing kind of character. One of the ways that we're also interpreting this is our obligation to help all students be able to succeed when they come to the university. And some students are very well equipped. They have great social networks. They have family who's been perhaps here to the university, and they're ready to hit the ground running when they come. Other students don't have that, right? We're thinking particularly first generation students or other students for one reason or another don't have those same kinds of resources when they hit the ground here. We're particularly concerned about them and about helping them to transition to the university and to succeed when they're here. So one of the parts of this proposal that I'm most excited about is the first year seminar. And what the first year seminar is it's taking one of those explorations classes and limiting the enrollment only to first year students. To be a first year student. And when students enroll in that explorations class, they will automatically be enrolled as well in a first year writing class and a religious education class, part of the foundations, one of the foundations courses. So that there's a cohort of students in those 8 credits of either the first or second semester during their first year. And this is one of those high impact educational practices that the literature suggests is particularly beneficial for those students who lack those kinds of resources. It's going to help make the university a little bit smaller for those students. We're going to take advantage of the peer mentor program, which already exists through first year experience. We'll be kind of coupled with those classes, and those peer mentors will work specifically with students in that class. There's going to be some modules, I guess you could describe them, that will be embedded in the class, that the instructors of the class will not be responsible for teaching, but first year experience will, through kind of a hybrid format, deliver to the students, that the peer mentors will then lead discussions with them about what is a BYU education and helping them to make this transition more effective. Okay. The statement on belonging. And your college has been particularly good, I think, in engaging some of these questions. It has also been at the forefront of our mind as we've been designing this new general education program. And so one of the disciplinary perspectives or explorations courses need to be designated as a diversity, unity, and belonging course. And the idea behind this is that we're going to engage, the central and core questions to the statement on belonging about helping our students to better navigate some of the issues connected to diversity and to belonging here at the university. These classes are not necessarily completely dedicated to that as a topic, but there needs to be a significant part of the class that's engaging it. So in other words, it could be a class on American history, right? Where it does kind of a deeper dive into the politics of the Jim Crow South, or it could be a sociology class that is dealing with this in some way. That there need to be some assignments that the class can show that invite students to engage these issues and to reflect upon them in a meaningful way. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of approach. It's going to be very different from one class to the next, how it's approached, but instructors who have a course that's designated for diversity, unity, belonging are expected to go through some training. We understand how difficult it can be to engage these topics. How you can engage it in a large section class is different than how you can engage it in a smaller class. Although there will be diversity in how it is presented, we would like there to be instructors to feel prepared to do that. It's not a panacea. It's not going to take care of all the issues and problems that we know exist around this topic. But this, together with what we're able to do in the first year seminar, together with what we're able to do in American Heritage, and what we hope that our intercultural competencies that should come out of our global outlook in foreign languages, we expect to help address this way in these issues in a meaningful way. The last part of the BYU aims is about lifelong learning and service. And I referenced this earlier. The idea behind this is a kind of approach to learning that will help students to understand the context of the subject matters that you teach and help them to engage those. And that we hope that this will stick with them longer. We anticipate that the literature suggests certainly that it does, and makes them better prepared for the the kinds of responsibilities that they're going to engage later in life, a lot of which they can begin to anticipate now. It's that broad-based engagement with other people and the way the world works and the way the world is that is intended to prepare them for such. So this is the overview, quick overview of the program. And there are things that are kind of beneath the hood, so to speak, that I haven't addressed here, dealing with assessment. This program should be far more accessible because we've designed it with assessment in mind, as opposed to trying to kind of impose assessment on it afterwards. And that should lead to better feedback and improvement of what we're doing. We feel it's better aligned with the BYU mission and aims, and maybe most significantly, it's thought of as a coherent program that that kind of interfaces, the classes interface with each other in a way that our current program doesn't. The way that it's experienced by most students now is this kind of smorgasbord of random samplings. And as a Scandinavianist, I can say that with some authority, right? That it's they understand that breadth is somehow good for them, but they don't always understand, well, why is it that I need to memorize the carbon cycle, or to memorize this this historical date or something like that. That it's this formula. The idea is that we're kind of moving in a way that will help that always to that contextualization to be more apparent to students. Okay, so speaking specifically then of the college here, this is a list of all the classes that are, at least in 2021, we're talking about general education classes that we're talking. See, it's quite a variety of classes. There are 67 as I counted them. I might be one or two off. You also have the unique distinction of having a couple of religion classes in your college, which I don't know that there's another college that teaches religion classes outside of religious education. The total number of students, and of course these are not discrete students, but total students taught in general education classes in 2021 was almost 31,000. The total number of seats that were offered was over 40,000. Your average section size, and I have reason to doubt this statistic a little bit, I'm not sure we calculated it just right, is 52. I'm not quite sure how American Heritage might throw this off in certain ways, because we counted American Heritage. It has numerous sections, but we counted it as one section. So that might be a little bit higher than in actuality. I didn't spend that much time drilling down on that. These are the categories that are covered. Okay, it's quite diverse, and so changes to general education impacts your college in some kind of unique ways. We're preparing data to help you make decisions about what you want to do with general education. We're not dictating this to you. We'll encourage and we'll nudge and we'll do other things like that. But ultimately, the decision is yours. It's your in the college and the departments about how you want to change how you teach and what you teach. So just to give you very rough kind of schematic sense of things, there's a lot that carries over directly. This is more evolutionary in so many ways than revolutionary. That it's things like American Heritage carry straight over advanced writing, the languages of learning, even arts and letters. You do teach a couple arts and letters classes, as well as social science classes. Of course, they're going to find a natural home in the disciplinary perspectives. Even the global and cultural awareness is going to find home in these disciplinary perspectives and explorations classes quite easily. One of the big changes, of course, is going to be to the Civ 1 and 2. So you teach, history department teaches a lot of civilization as well as political science. And there is not a formal Civ requirement anymore. And so a decision needs to be made about what to do with those resources. Our strong recommendation would be to think about converting those to explorations classes. And there's different ways that can be done. If keeping a basic chronological structure was important to you, that could certainly be done. And the idea is you focus on a kind of theme as you kind of have that kind of chronological trajectory. But again, this is something that individual programs and departments can determine. But there's going to be a need for explorations classes, and so that's an area that we would encourage you to think about. They could also be turned into disciplinary perspectives classes. If you felt like for your major, it was really important still to have a Civ sequence. For example, you could keep that just understanding that there's going to be less demand for those Civ classes, but you can still keep Civ classes. That this is a big kind of and quick survey of world history. That approach could be taken too, and there would be students who undoubtedly would be interested in doing that even outside of the majors. The quantitative reasoning, there's only one quantitative reasoning class that's taught currently in college, which is in Family Life 200. I think it's Family Finances, and that is one that we need to talk about. I'm not exactly sure what the best thing to do with that class is, but there's several options. One would be to get it to qualify for quantitative reasoning, but it would be asking that class to step up a level in terms of the complexity of the case studies and things like that it's dealing with. So that's something that could certainly be considered. It might also be not a bad way for students to come and get some experience to get them prepared to take. So this is, again, this is incredibly rough, but just to give you a sense that there's a place for a lot of what you already do in the program. We're developing, have developed some reports to help you make some of these decisions as well. So those who are interested in kind of getting into this data, we can provide you access through the Tableau, BYU Tableau website, where there are some data visualizations, and you can download this data in the spreadsheet form as well. This is just an example of the Anthropology 101 class for the last 3 years. You can see the enrollments, the total number of students that were enrolled, the number of seats that were offered, this kind of thing. For the new general education program to be successful, we're going to need to offer general education seats, so to speak, at about the same rate that we do now. There is, because there's a total reduction in credits, there is a little bit of slack, but basically we need to keep teaching as many general education classes or opportunity students as we do now. Those are going to be shuffling around a little bit where they're offered. And again, we are not going to dictate to you, but if for some reason your department stopped offering a lot of general education seats that they did before, we will ask about what's going on and how we might be able to encourage that to get back to where it was. But we're not imposing anticipating the need to impose any kind of strict metric on exactly how many enrollments, things like that. And let me also hasten to say that it's not only general education that has a claim on some of these classes, of course. It's your majors and it's other majors. There's dependencies on these classes. And so particularly classes like Econ 110, sociology and psychology, there's a lot of majors outside of the department that depend on those that you're probably going to need to keep teaching those classes as is, right? And slot them in under disciplinary perspectives. So we're not asking for all classes to kind of shift the resources between perspectives and explorations. That won't make sense in some departments because it'll make sense to continue on classes and perspectives class. Okay. In terms of how this impacts the majors, this is a pretty rough calculation. Just taking a look at the maps and kind of putting on what we've proposed. And for most majors, there's either no change or there's actually reduction in credits. For a few, that's not the case, and it's Civ that makes the difference here, really, because these are programs that specify a particular section of Civ needs to be taken. And so the question is, well, will you continue to do that? If so, and depending on where that fits, within GE, this could lead to an increase. So this is a pretty rough, and this is kind of without any adjustments or any closer looking at efficiencies that might be found, but there are a few programs that that would be looking at actually an increase in credits. But on the university as a whole, I want to say it's about 90+% of programs that it's either neutral or actually a reduction in the load. Okay. So we have a few minutes. you want to ask some questions?
The perspective class course to meet
Yeah, so the way that that's going to be handled is through the Faculty General Education Council. So that's the governing board for general education. It's 11 members on that, plus myself, a member from each college. The representative from your college is Jenny Pulsifer from history. And there will be a subcommittee that reports to the FGC that will be in charge of that requirement. And so to qualify for that, you'll turn in a relatively simple application that will involve syllabus as well as a description of some of these assignments that we're going to be asking for. And that group will, that subcommittee, which will be made up of representatives from colleges that teach that designation, will make that determination, and there will be a recertification process like we have now with general education.
count for the course and any faculty member who teaches it?
So that's a tricky question. If it's a perspectives course, the way that we've done in the past is it's been every 3 years that we certify class, and every 3 years you recertify the class. The expectation is that any instructor who's teaching, particularly the diversity, unity, and belonging requirement, will have gone through some basic training. And so we're going to have to work with the departments about how we keep control of that, because the class will be designated, but you're right, the expectation is, oh, you have an instructor that wasn't originally part of the cohort teaching that. We need to make sure that we get them in and get them trained. And our exact mechanism for dealing with that is to be determined. Right? There's a lot of implementation questions that we're going to get to work out.
So I'm wondering what kind of institutional plans there are to create an environment where race, equity, and belonging courses can be successful, given the kind of attacks and the ways that students are actually being encouraged to push back against those efforts.
That's a great question. One of the things that we want to make sure is happening, and we hope that the Office of Belonging is going to assist with this, but we're not waiting. We're not waiting for them to take over. This is that we need a good, prolonged, robust discussion among the faculty about how we teach it. And we in general education want to help host that conversation. And so by creating this designation and kind of the ongoing training, we like to have kind of an ongoing series where we are hearing from each other about what's going on in the classroom, how we're teaching, about research that's going on, bringing people from the outside to help with this as well. This is important. We need to push this conversation. There is pushback from different segments. There's a concern that this is going to take over our curriculum. A concern that I think is a little bit overblown. I would love that to be a problem, quite frankly. That I'm more worried about having enough to teach. One of the virtues, I think, is a virtue of not having a single class, an American Heritage style class that kind of takes care of all the instruction, is that the research that we looked at tends to suggest that actually has the opposite effect that you would want on some students, right? That students who come in with a really defensive kind of attitude about this, that it actually puts their defenses up even more, becomes this kind of big target. By diversifying the offerings, it allows students to engage this in a way maybe that they're more comfortable with. That's good and bad, right? But it's but I think that in the long run, I think that's our best approach, is to have different ways to do this. That you can do it through sociology, which is probably going to take a more head-on kind of look, for example, with race and ethnicity and things like this. You can do it through public health, right? And the way the thing is that is, data suggests that there's disparities in access, and why are there these kinds of disparities, and what does this say to us about the right? And that might be a better way for some students to engage it. I've not answered your question because I don't have a great answer to it, other than that we have to have created a structure where there's a constant conversation going on about this, so that we can move move it forward. And that's what we're committing to do with general education, is to help host that conversation.
I'm also wondering if there are things that could happen in freshman orientation.
Oh, absolutely.
And
that's part of that curriculum, that hybrid curriculum that would be in that first year seminar. Absolutely.
And some of the, and maybe more vigorous vetting of peer mentors.
Peer mentors are yeah, you get all kinds. Absolutely. When they're problems, if you know of specific problems that you don't think of them, just you can talk to me, but make sure that gets passed along too. Yes.
Follow up with your logic there on having a diversity of classes versus one class that covers this. Why double down on keeping American heritage though?
American heritage is
It's the sacred cow.
Sam, do I want to weigh into this at this college? I don't know.
Especially the scripture you invoked in Doctrine and Covenants 90 and 88. I mean, it would make more sense to have a global heritage class.
I think good arguments can be made for that, certainly. American heritage does a lot of really valuable things, and that we felt were important keeping. There's also a sense that this is also something very important to the board, to the degree that they actually asked us to make changes to make sure that it was absolutely clear that American heritage was not going anywhere. So that's part of the answer, but
literature doesn't matter, the board does. Gotcha.
it's a balance. It's a balance, I think I would say. You had a question as well?
Oh, I just had a question. So in this kind of changes to majors kind of credit situation. So I would direct two programs in free teaching and social science teaching that would both potentially see a credit change. So what's the most efficient way for any of us to be able to see specifically how you got to this?
How we got to this?
Yeah, so
I
that
would be happy to.
like, what are those so we can know, because we have state mandates that we can and cannot change. And
Yes.
for the teaching majors, they're already massive. So like adding 6 credits is gonna be a nightmare.
Yeah, hopefully though, with the teaching majors, they're moving in a direction of doing kind of competency-based sorts of things as opposed to credit-based things. And so we know that's a slow process. And
Yeah,
that's
it's
not
not
happening
that
overnight.
simple, but yeah.
Yeah, so that might help take care of some of these. Contact me and I can send you the spreadsheet that I did this on and talk you through it. And it is entirely possible that I didn't understand something on the map, which we can kind of talk through and what some options might be, why I made this assumption as opposed to others. And this goes for any program that I am happy to sit down and kind of work through what some of these implications might be and make some recommendations about, well, you might think about doing this or this or this, right?
Narrow technical question and then a little less narrow technical. Narrow one is, and this affects a few classes and departments here. Do Econ 110, Poly 110, and the history class still count combinations towards American heritage?
That is not part of the proposal. The proposal is that all students take American heritage.
So those will be eliminated.
That's the options, yeah. There's like 13 or 14 different options, and it tends to create a lot of confusion with certain students.
Okay. Second question, almost a suggestion. You've described the implementation process. And as I've looked at this, thoughts arose in my mind like, wow, well, how did they decide which classes in my major didn't count for this? Then I thought, oh, wait, as an administrator in my department, I would really, really like to have some initial stage happen in this. It's actually fairly automatic, but maybe kind of generous. Because that saves all of us a lot of time. Whereas if I have to go through and say, oh my gosh, every one class we have to apply for and go through a committee, and that's going to take a million years for everybody. So yeah, I know you said you're just working this out, but is there some sense of that first option that there's kind of some default things that will happen?
Yeah, absolutely. We're pragmatists, right? That a lot of have to try to certify everything in 1 year. And so there's going to be a lot of experimentation, and that was proved in the old one. We're going to prove this in the other. This is going to be your cycle for re-upping. There's going to be a lot of those kinds of equivalencies made early on. absolutely. And we'll work with departments to make this not as, to relieve the burden as much as we can to do that. I didn't mention this, our implementation date is a big question. And one of the questions is that this is not approved yet. This has gone through the University Curriculum Council. Sam, like 6 months of debate, kind of going back, compromise and this, that, and the other, and is currently awaiting both ASB and board approval, and they're kind of coordinating that. Having said all of that, we're very optimistic that it is going to be approved in a form pretty close to what I've presented to you today. But when that approval comes, it's crucial. If that approval comes sooner rather than later, then we're still hoping for a fall 2024 start date. That is, students who come in the fall of 2024 would start in the GE program. If that approval is delayed much longer, we're probably looking at a fall of 2025 start date. We might be looking at a fall of 2025 start date anyway, as we really start getting into this and see the speed at which we're going to get some of these courses up and running. What would need to be in place by fall of 2024 is not everything, right? It's only the incoming class that would be needing some of these things. And what we're going to have to do is make blanket equivalencies between the current and the new program. And what that's basically going to look like in practical terms is a lot of the civ classes will continue to count for, will count for explorations classes, and then we'll eventually phase that out. That and the fact that we're already starting to develop these classes. And the idea is that we want to identify some kind of marquee classes from every college that, to really develop, make even possible to deliver potentially at a large scale so that we have something that's both a model for other classes, but as well something that could accommodate students in those initial phases of startup. And GE is going to be providing startup funds to do this, both in terms of course buyouts, chances to team teach with other people, some different sorts of things. And we'll be talking about that at the GE Academy, which is going to be the 14th of June. So those of you who teach GE classes should be getting an announcement any day now in your mailbox. Physical announcement about GE Academy, and then you'll begin the electronic one next week. Yeah, we'll probably
Last question real quick.
So, I mean, and just like the different visualizations of this, the diversity, equity, and belonging requirement has gone from being like prominent to being a footnote. So like, I mean, I feel like multiple layers of frustration with how that has happened, and even just seeing like the line of like awareness classes are going to be moving right over here. I mean, I think part of the problem with that was that what was being counted as, is this just a watered down version of what is actually like hoped for? Like, I don't think talking about our international expertise or experience is the same as actually like exposing students to diversity and teaching students that their experience is not universal. I don't understand why can't American Heritage also be required to be a diversity, unity, and belonging? Why can't they both happen? It's just.
I think it should, and I think that's the expectation with the textbook provision, that we've been able to give some input on that. And this is one of the things that we pointed out to them that we'd like to see more of, and they've been very responsive to that feedback. So just because American Heritage doesn't have that designation, I mean, that's by design. That American Heritage is supposed to be its own thing, but that doesn't mean that it's not. I understand your frustration that the relegation to a footnote. A lot of that is interpretation of our visualizations and the complexity of trying to make something simple. There has been pushback though too, and part of this is compromise.
I've experienced it firsthand.
If you teach these things, I imagine
Part of the frustration is feeling like once again the university is ceding to the demands of these people who are threatening violence and getting us fired, rather than
standing behind our commitment to these issues and to our defense of the importance of every BYU student being exposed to and having a better understanding of these important principles.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and we're committed to keeping that an important part of this.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks so much. So, the GE, what do you call it again?